I always looked forward to hitting the road with my son Tom, just the two of us, rolling down the highway, making memories. But this time was different. We were driving through West Virginia on our way to visit family, and everything that could go wrong was going wrong. The AC in the car had died, leaving us to stew in the sticky August heat. Tom, who's 9, was getting fidgety. I wasn't in the mood to play car games. Exhaustion, heat, and frustration were building. I just needed a break from the endless miles of road. We'd been driving for hours, only stopping briefly to refuel. Both of us were in desperate need of a bathroom break when I spotted a sign for a rest stop a few miles ahead. It felt like a blessing. Finally, we could stretch our legs, cool down, and get some air that wasn't boiling hot. The rest stop wasn't exactly inviting. One of those places that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in a decade. The parking lot was half empty, with a few trucks scattered around. The building itself was small, with weather-beaten siding and cracked windows. Not the worst I'd seen, but not a place you'd want to linger. Tom, of course, didn't care. He just wanted out of the car. He hopped out almost as soon as I put it in park, running toward the restroom area before I could even tell him to stay close. I watched him go, trying to shake off the irritation hanging over me all day. I figured I'd let him burn off some energy while I used the bathroom myself. As I walked toward the building, a strange feeling crept over me. Something was wrong, nothing obvious, just a sense that it was too quiet. Even the few people milling around didn't seem like they belonged. I brushed it off. I just wanted to get back on the road. When we were back in the car, I noticed a white pickup truck a few spaces down. Inside, a man in his 50s was sitting there, looking like he had nothing better to do. His eyes followed us as we backed out of the spot. I didn't think much of it. People stare. It's what they do. We got back on the highway, and things seemed to settle down. Tom was finally quiet, staring out the window. The wind rushing through the open windows wasn't as good as AC, but it was something. I started thinking about what we'd do once we arrived, grab dinner, relax for the evening. The rest stop faded from my mind. But about 10 minutes down the road, I noticed that same white pickup truck in my rearview mirror. It was following us, too closely. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the guy got back on the road at the same time we did. But after a few more miles, it became clear he wasn't just going in the same direction. He was following us. I tried shaking him off by speeding up. The truck kept pace. Slowing down didn't help either. He adjusted his speed to match mine, staying the same distance behind no matter what I did. My irritation returned, mingling with something worse. "What's that truck doing, Dad?" Tom asked from the back seat. "I don't know, bud. Probably just some guy not paying attention," I said, trying to keep my tone light. No point in freaking him out. But deep down, I didn't believe my own explanation. After a few more miles, the pickup pulled up alongside us, matching our speed. I looked over. The driver was staring directly at me, his face twisted in urgency. He waved his hand, signaling for me to roll down my window. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to interact with a stranger, especially one who'd been tailing us. But his expression wasn't aggressive. He looked scared, or at least concerned. Against my better judgment, I cracked the window just enough to hear him. "There's something in your car," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "The back seat! Check your back seat!" At first, his words didn't register. Then they hit me like a freight train. The back seat. Tom. I turned around, my heart leaping into my throat. Tom was sitting there, perfectly still, staring out the window. But just beyond him, on the far side of the back seat, I saw it, a shadow. Something lurking just out of view. My body went cold. I hit the brakes, swerving onto the shoulder. The pickup truck followed, pulling off the road behind me. Throwing the car into park, I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned fully to face the back seat. Before I could speak, the back door flung open and a figure bolted out of the car. A man, worn down in tattered clothes. He didn't look back as he sprinted across the highway, disappearing into the thick trees beyond. I sat there, stunned. It took a moment to process what had just happened. "Dad?" Tom's voice was shaky. "Who was that?" I don't know," I said, pulling him close, checking to make sure he was okay. He seemed fine, just shaken, like me. The man from the pickup ran over. "Are you okay? Did you see him?" I nodded, still catching my breath. "Yeah. I saw him." Long enough to explain the situation to the pickup driver and gather ourselves. Tom kept asking who the man was and why he'd gotten into our car, but I didn't have answers. Somewhere between the rest stop and the highway, a stranger had climbed into the back seat, hiding under our backpacks and coats. We didn't call the police. By the time I thought to, the intruder was long gone. And honestly, I didn't want to relive the ordeal. I just wanted to get back on the road. As we drove away, I kept glancing at the back seat and rearview mirror. Of course, it was just Tom now, staring out the window, lost in thought. Neither of us talked much for the rest of the trip. Every time I think about that drive, I wonder who that man was and what he intended to do. All I know is we got lucky. Lucky the guy in the pickup saw him, and lucky we didn't find out the hard way what he was capable of. Road trips are supposed to be fun. You pack your things, grab your friends, pick a destination, and hit the road. That's exactly what we did. A few friends and I crammed into Jason's old SUV, headed to a weekend music festival 3 states away. There's something magical about the open road, windows down, music blasting, and a sense of freedom that makes the miles fly by. It was me, Jason, Sarah, and Maria. We'd been friends for years, and this trip felt like the perfect escape from the daily grind. No stress, just good vibes. We left later than planned, and by the time we hit unfamiliar territory, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. The scenery changed from suburban sprawl to winding roads, rolling hills, and thick clusters of trees. As night fell, the road seemed to stretch longer and darker, with fewer cars and no signs of civilization. The farther we drove, the more it felt like we were leaving the world behind. We should have taken the main route, Maria muttered from the back seat, glaring at her phone. The GPS screen was blank, just a spinning circle where the map should have been. This way's quicker. Trust me, the GPS will kick back in eventually, Jason said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. His confidence seemed forced. I didn't say anything, though I shared Maria's unease. I was riding shotgun, staring out the window as shadows swallowed the road. We passed an old rusted sign. It creaked in the wind, barely legible in the dim headlights, bridge 10 miles ahead. Jason nodded toward it. We'll cross the bridge, find somewhere to crash for the night. Shouldn't be too far now. The air in the car felt heavier as we drove on. A chill settled in despite the summer warmth, and the woods on either side of the road seemed to press closer. That's when I saw it. Something or someone standing off to the side of the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but as we got closer, the shape took form. It was a next to an old mile marker, staring into the woods. He didn't have a backpack or even a jacket, and he wasn't signaling for help. He just stood there, motionless. His clothes were dark, almost blending into the night, but there was something wrong about him, something I couldn't quite name. Jason slowed the car instinctively. You think he needs help? Sarah asked, her voice hesitant. No, Maria said sharply from the back seat. We're not stopping. I don't care if he's stranded or whatever. No way. Jason drove past without a word, his eyes flicking toward the man as we passed. The figure didn't move. He didn't turn to look at us, didn't react at all. It was as if he didn't even notice the car. A few miles down the road, Sarah broke the silence. That was weird. Jason nodded. Did you see his face? No, I said, glancing at him. He didn't look at us. He wasn't blinking, Maria chimed in, her voice tight, just staring, like a statue or something. The road grew narrower and more isolated, the trees leaning over the asphalt like they wanted to swallow us whole. Every so often, I thought I saw movement in the woods, shadows shifting just out of view. I told myself it was just the flickering headlights, but my unease grew. Finally, we reached the bridge. It was old, rusted steel beams and weathered planks. Narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars, it spanned a slow-moving river far below. In the daylight, it might have been picturesque, but under the cover of night, it was Jason slowed as we crossed, the tires clunking against the uneven metal grates. Halfway across, Maria gasped. Oh my God, no way. I followed her gaze, and my stomach dropped. At the far end of the bridge stood the same man. It didn't make sense. He couldn't have gotten here before us. There hadn't been any turnoffs, no cars passing us, nothing. But there he was, standing as still as before, his eyes locked on our car now. Jason's grip tightened on the wheel. That's impossible. Turn around, Sarah whispered. We should turn around. But turning around on that narrow bridge was impossible. We had no choice but to drive past him again. Jason pressed the gas, speeding up as we approached. The man didn't move, but as we passed, his head turned slowly, his eyes following the car. I caught a glimpse of his face in the dim light, pale, gaunt, and expressionless, like a mask stretched over bone. "Something's wrong with him," Maria murmured, her voice trembling. No one disagreed. Jason didn't slow down until we were well past the bridge. The tension in the car was suffocating, and no one spoke. 10 minutes later, relief washed over us as we spotted the dim glow of lights in the distance, a gas station. Jason pulled into the lot and we all piled out, grateful for the reprieve. The gas station was old, its neon sign flickering weakly. Inside, a bored-looking attendant barely glanced up from his magazine. Maria and Sarah headed to the restroom while Jason and I stayed by the car, stretching our legs. "You think we'll see him again?" Jason asked, his tone half joking but laced with unease. "I hope not." As I scanned the dark tree line, movement caught my eye. My breath hitched. He was there. The man stood just beyond the edge of the gas station's light, half hidden by the shadows. He was watching us. "Jason," I whispered, my voice shaking. "He's here." Jason didn't hesitate. "Get in the car, now." We scrambled back into the SUV and Jason floored it, peeling out of the lot without looking back. The road stretched on, dark and endless. No signs, no towns, just us in the oppressive night. After what felt like an eternity, the bridge loomed ahead again. "We're going in circles," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. Jason didn't respond. He threw the car into reverse, but headlights appeared in the distance behind us. A car was creeping closer, its shape barely visible in the rearview mirror. Relief mixed with dread. Then, a soft tap came from the back window. We turned, and there he was, his pale face inches from the glass, staring, unblinking. Jason slammed the car into drive, flooring it toward the bridge. The tires screeched as we crossed, the bridge seeming to stretch longer and longer with every second. Finally, the other side came into view, and Jason didn't slow until the bridge was far behind us. A worn highway sign appeared, pointing toward a town just a few miles away. The sight of civilization felt like a lifeline. We pulled into a brightly lit gas station, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of safety. But as I stepped out of the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't escaped, that somewhere, out there in the dark, he was still watching. Road trips always have their own kind of rhythm. The first few hours are filled with excitement, crunching on snacks, sipping coffee, and belting out tunes to the soundtrack of the open road. But as the hours drag on, the initial buzz wears off, leaving you with the monotony of endless miles and the hum of tires on asphalt. That's where we were when the storm hit, and everything took a turn. It was late, well past midnight, and Audrey and I were somewhere along the long stretch of highway that wound between her parents' home and ours. We'd spent the weekend with her family, and while the visit was nice, we were both eager to get back to the comfort of our own space. The rain came out of nowhere. One moment the sky was dark but clear, and the next, sheets of water were cascading down, obscuring everything. It wasn't just a drizzle or even a regular rainstorm. This was the kind of downpour that made you question if the sky was falling. The windshield wipers worked furiously, but they couldn't keep up. The world outside was a blur of water and shadow, the headlights barely cutting through the dense curtain of rain. The darkness felt heavier, almost alive, as if the storm had swallowed the road ahead. "I can't see anything," I muttered, leaning forward over the wheel, my knuckles white as I gripped it. Audrey, sitting beside me, was unusually quiet. She stared out at the rain with a worried expression. "Maybe we should pull over," she suggested after a few minutes. "Wait it out a bit." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to stop. It wasn't safe to keep driving like this, not when we couldn't even see the faint lines of the road. Up ahead, a small pull-off came into view. One of those emergency shoulders meant for broken-down cars. I eased the car over, the tires crunching on the gravel as we came to a stop. For a moment, we just sat there. The storm raged on around us, the sound of the rain pounding on the roof almost deafening. I turned off the engine, and the sudden stillness inside the car was both a relief and unsettling. "This is kind of peaceful," Audrey said after a moment, leaning back in her seat, in a creepy, middle-of-nowhere kind of way. I chuckled. "Yeah, peaceful, sure." The rain continued to batter the windows, and we sat in silence, listening to the relentless rhythm of the storm. Then, suddenly, Audrey's hand shot out, gripping my arm tightly. "Did you see that?" she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. See what? I asked, my heart skipping a beat at her tone. She didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the window. Out there, she said finally, pointing toward the guardrail. I think I saw someone. I turned my head, squinting through the rain-streaked glass. At first I saw nothing, just the swirling chaos of water and darkness. But then I saw it. A figure, barely visible through the downpour, standing just off the side of the road. My breath caught. The figure was a woman. Her soaked clothes clung to her body, and her hair hung in wet strands over her face. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring in the direction of our car. She looks cold, Audrey whispered, her voice tinged with concern. Maybe her car broke down. I hesitated. Something about the woman didn't feel right. The way she stood, motionless in the storm, sent a shiver down my spine. I don't know, I said cautiously. I don't see any other cars. Maybe we should just stay put. Audrey frowned. We can't just leave her out there. What if she needs help? Against my better judgment, I rolled the window down slightly, rain immediately splattering inside. Hey, I called out, my voice raised to cut through the sound of the storm. Are you okay? Do you need help? The woman didn't respond right away. She stood there, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, she nodded. She needs help, Audrey said, already reaching for the door. Wait, I said, grabbing her arm. Something doesn't feel right. Audrey hesitated but looked back at the woman, her expression conflicted. We can't just leave her. Reluctantly, I unlocked the door. The woman moved toward us with deliberate, unhurried steps. Her movements were odd, almost mechanical, and as she reached the car, she opened the back door without a word and slid inside. The smell hit us immediately. A mix of wet clothes and something else, something metallic and sour. Audrey turned in her seat to face her. Where's your car? Audrey asked gently. The woman didn't respond. She sat stiffly, staring out the window, water dripping from her hair onto the... Ma'am, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you need us to take you somewhere? A gas station? A hospital? It's cold, she whispered finally, her voice soft and distant. So cold. Audrey and I exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe we should drop her at the next town, Audrey suggested in a low voice. Yeah, I said, starting the engine. The sooner the better. But as I pulled back onto the road, the atmosphere in the car shifted. The air felt heavier, colder. I glanced in the rearview mirror and my stomach dropped. The woman was staring at me, her expression blank but her eyes seemed wrong, too dark, too empty. It's so cold, she said again, louder this time. Before I could respond, she lunged forward, her hands wrapping around my throat. Her grip was impossibly strong, her nails digging into my skin. Audrey screamed, turning in her seat to pull at the woman's arms. Let him go, she cried, her voice panicked. The car swerved wildly as I fought to keep control, gasping for air. I slammed on the brakes and the car screeched to a stop. Together, Audrey and I managed to shove the woman out of the car, her soaked body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. I floored the gas pedal, the car fishtailing on the wet road before speeding off into the night. My throat ached where her nails had dug in, and Audrey was trembling beside me, her hands clutching her seatbelt. What the hell just happened? She whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just occurred. As we drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror out of instinct. My blood ran cold. In the distance, illuminated by the red glow of our taillights, the woman stood on the side of the road, watching us. We didn't stop again that night. The next day, I checked the news, expecting to find some mention of a woman on the highway, but there was nothing. No reports, no sightings, no explanation. It was as if she'd never existed. To this day, I can't explain what happened on that stormy night. All I know is that we let something into our car, something dangerous, something not quite human. Even now, whenever it rains, I find myself checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there again, waiting for another chance to get in.